Behold, the Valley of the Kings in ancient Egypt, the largest and oldest burying ground known to man, where the ashes of oblivion now enshroud the mortal remains of mighty pharaohs, the dictators of ancient Egypt. The gigantic pyramids which formerly marked the graves of pharaohs proved to be conspicuous landmarks for tomb robbers, and chiefly because of this, a remote and desolate part of Egypt was chosen as a burying ground, and it is now known as the Valley of the Kings. But even here, the tombs were plundered in ancient times, and in modern times, archaeologists have labored here with fruitful results. One of the more recent discoveries being that of the tomb of King Tutankhamun, the young pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, who died at the reputed age of 24 years. When his tomb was opened, the priceless treasures that were found in it startled a modern world and reawakened universal interest in the Valley of the Kings, where archaeologists are still carrying on extensive excavations. This is the entrance to the celebrated tomb of King Tutankhamun. Although the treasures found here have been removed to the Cairo Museum, the sarcophagus of the young king remains where it was discovered. Perhaps the most startling of all the relics of the past in Upper Egypt are the giant statues known as the Colossi of Memnon. Centuries before the Roman Empire was founded, these colossal and weird figures were sitting out here in the valley of the Nile, silent sentinels of time, guarding the royal tombs that are hidden in the barren hills behind them. This is Luxor, site of the ancient city of Thebes, where one may find comfort in the best of modern hotels, and at the same time live in an atmosphere of peace and antiquity, amidst the famous ruins of Upper Egypt. For several thousand years, the Egyptians developed their civilization on the banks of their beloved river, a civilization that finally became the most precious heritage of the Greeks and the Romans. The Temple of Luxor, which was built about 1,500 years before Christ, is a remarkable tribute to the architectural genius of the Egyptian pharaohs. The unusual dry climate has made it possible for these columns to stand as we see them now for more than 3,000 years. 3,000 years. We must keep this element of time in our minds to best appreciate the architectural achievements of man in an age that knew nothing of modern machinery and very little of the modern methods of construction. No people, ancient or modern, ever conceived the art of architecture on so broad and grand a scale as the old Egyptian pharaohs. They may have been tyrants and slave drivers, but they interpreted life in heroic proportions and left the record of it in their temples. On the walls of the numerous temples at Karnak may be seen the pictured story of a people who seem to have a passion for recording the daily routine of their lives in stone. Indisputable records that perpetuate the memory of the founders of what the Western world now calls civilization. The Avenue of Sphinx, forming an entrance to the Temple of Karnak, is one of ancient Egypt's most famous attractions. And inside the walls of the temple may be found some of the best preserved examples of Egyptian architecture, including the famous Karnak column, which no visitor fails to observe. One of the more interesting features of Egypt is the fact that the past and present are still in harmony with each other, and we find life today as it was thousands of years ago when the temples were new and this unique device was used in irrigating the land, exactly the same as it is used today. Around and around the wheel turns, generation after generation, and century after century, a picturesque symbol of unchanging Egypt. Older than the water wheel is the desert well, which in this instance is manipulated by a blind man who doles out a limited supply of water to his daily customers. Perhaps the most interesting method of irrigation is that which is used along the banks of the Nile, where buckets of water are relayed from terrace to terrace by a crude invention called the shaduf. The total length of the Nile is about 4,000 miles, and for almost half of this distance it flows through the vast Sahara Desert, transforming the fertile path it creates into a narrow strip of habitable soil, which forms the chief source of life for about 13 million inhabitants. When we consider that the ancient Egyptians were the reputed founders of the Western civilization, we wonder why the progress which they made so many thousands of years ago could have been restrained so completely that their descendants who toil along the banks of the Nile today have changed but little in their way of living these past 3,000 years. Although we wonder at this primitiveness, we are overjoyed that the manners and customs of ancient Egypt still prevail in the valley of the Nile, giving to the land of the pharaohs a halo of romance that is fittingly expressed in song.
Kingdom of the fair.